Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dwayne Dixon, and I am the Interim Music Officer at the Ontario Arts Council. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that this webinar is being recorded. The recording will only be shared with applicants to this deadline. I'd like to also share a little bit more information about myself. I was born and raised in Toronto and have a background as a hip hop artist, cultural curator, and was past vice president of UMAC, the Urban Music Association of Canada. Along my journey, I have hosted and produced for radio, music and multi-arts festivals, and led nonprofit organizations such as Manifesto Community Projects and NIA Center for the Arts as their executive director. I am joined by two colleagues today. First, please meet Hind El Ouardi. Hind, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Dwayne. Hi, I'm Hind. I'm a program administrator who works closely with Dwayne on the Music Recording Projects program. It's my phone number and email that you'll find listed on the Music Recording Project program webpage, and I answer many questions from applicants every day. I'm glad to be involved in this webinar with Dwayne and Barbara.
Thank you, Hind. And now I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Barbara Gilbert. She has worked with me in the preparation of this webinar. Barbara, would you like to say a few words?
Just realized I was muted. Thanks, Dwayne. My name's Barbara, and I'm the Associate Francophone Arts Officer, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to work on the music juries in this pilot project with Dwayne and Hind, and I'll be curious to hear your feedback to us after the session. We're gathered today from different parts of the province and in a virtual space, but I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territory in which the Ontario Arts Council's main office is located. I invite you to think about your own location in the province in relation to the territory where you are today. The treaty signed for the land on which we're located is the Toronto Purchase Treaty, which includes the territories of many nations, including the Wendat, the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississauga, and the Métis Nation. The lands were taken under the Doctrine of Discovery. This doctrine was established in 1455 by the Pope and is based on the concept of terra nullius, defined as, quote, a principle according to which any Christian monarch who discovers non-Christian lands has the right to proclaim them his own because they belong to no one, end quote. I mention this because it affects me personally. My ancestors arrived in what was then called New France in the 1720s, and so I know that they benefited from this doctrine, and consequently that I benefit from it. We're not guilty of the past, but we all have a responsibility for the present and the future. These territorial recognitions are a gesture, a moment to take stock of the present situation with a new perspective on our collective history. With the discovery of children's cemeteries at many residential school sites, it's even more important to be aware of our collective past and to take concrete actions to ensure a better future. I would like to recognize the diversity of the First Peoples of the area known as Tekaronto and honor their stewardship. Today, the meeting place that is Toronto is still home to many Indigenous people of Turtle Island. I am grateful for the opportunity to work in this community and on this land.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you all for joining us today for this feedback session. We are piloting a new way for Ontario Arts Council staff to share important feedback on your applications. This pilot project came to be because it is becoming increasingly difficult, if not impossible, for OAC staff to continue to respond to the high volume of requests for individual feedback meetings. We also noticed that we were repeating much of the same information each time we gave feedback to an applicant. We thought a webinar like this would be a more efficient and useful way to provide all of you with this information while still making one-on-one feedback meetings available to those who want it. This way, applicants will have heard all the same important general context information that will be covered here today. Short one-on-one feedback meetings can then focus only on the information that is specific to your application. In any case, that is our intent. You will have to let us know whether you think this is the right way forward. We're also hoping that shared learning of questions and answers will add another layer of information. During this session, we will provide you with one, an overview of the results of this specific deadline of the music recording projects. Two, an explanation of how your applications were assessed. Three, some specific comments from the assessors. And four, some time at the end for us to answer your questions. We will also be asking you for your feedback along the way to help us learn from this experience. As this is the first time we're doing feedback in this format, and we want to ensure we provide you with the most useful information to help you prepare future applications. We'll take a few polls or surveys throughout the webinar for you to tell us what is most useful to you.
Before we move on, I will quickly share with you how you can find the grant results from this and other deadlines and programs on OAC's website. On our homepage, select the grant results, the grant tab, and in the column on the right, you'll see grant results. This takes you to the grant results page. We're sharing the link in the chat as well. Once you get to this page, you can search by program name, deadline month and year, and you can consult previous year's results by clicking on the year in the column on the left. The result page also shows the name of the peer assessors for this deadline. Let's talk more about assessment for a moment.
Thank you, Hind. The Music Recording Projects program is evaluated by juries. Juries assess grant applications in most of the Ontario Arts Council's project programs. They review the applications, determine which applicants will receive grants, and decide on the amount of each grant. A different group of assessors is brought together at every deadline. Every year, OAC invites hundreds of artists and arts professionals to serve as assessors, directly involving the arts community in evaluating applications and making grant decisions. OAC strives to reflect the diversity of the applicants in the group of assessors we use. This includes their expertise with different genres or styles of music, knowledge of different instruments, experience in songwriting or composing, and experience with recording projects. We sometimes also include other professionals in this field, such as sound engineers.
Yeah, and beyond our artistic experience, we also consider the communities and cultural backgrounds these individuals come from. In particular, we consider the priority groups identified in OAC's most recent strategic plan. Some of these priority groups have a unique history, identity, and status in Canada, and some have faced historical and systemic barriers, while others reflect OAC's province-wide mandate. All are essential to the future of the arts sector. OAC acknowledges that there may be other population groups, but there are other population groups in Ontario that face barriers. But the OAC priority groups are artists of color, deaf artists and artists with disabilities, francophone artists, Indigenous artists, new generation artists between the ages of 18 and 30, and artists living in regions outside Toronto. Beyond these, some things that we keep in mind when selecting assessors include other considerations of community and identity, such as gender representation.
At this deadline, we received a total of 446 applications to the Music Recording Projects program. Of the 446 applications, 5 were withdrawn by OAC for reasons such as not being a resident of Ontario, the same project being submitted to a different program, or the application being incomplete. All other applications were reviewed and assessed. In the end, 55 projects were funded. Given the high volume of applications, we decided to divide them into 3 to be evaluated by 3 different groups of assessors. A group of francophone assessors was chosen to evaluate the applications that were submitted in French, while 2 groups of assessors reviewed the applications submitted in English. These were divided in half in alphabetical order by applicant name. As is always the case, many musical genres were represented in this group of applications at this deadline, including jazz, folk, hip hop, R&B, classical, pop, rock, and everything in between. It's important to know that no genre is ever turned away. Every genre is welcome. Over the years, we funded everything from choral music to reggae to heavy metal.
You may notice when you look at this deadline's results announcement that almost half of the grant recipients were from Toronto. That's because a large percentage of the applications we received came from Toronto artists. Assessors do keep regional context in mind as they evaluate your applications. They consider access to resources and are reminded that artistic tastes and cultural contexts can be different in rural and remote communities. They want to ensure that applicants from all parts of the province are assessed equitably and that the funding is spread out among the various regions. This is discussed at length during the allocation process because, as we've already shared, artists outside of Toronto are one of the OAC priority groups.
In total, if we add up all the requested amounts from the 446 applications, the total amount adds up to $3,664,570. The program budget for this deadline was $370,000. 100% of that amount was given out as grants. The reason we provide these statistics is to give you an idea of just how competitive this program can be. There were many applications the jury wanted to fund, but couldn't. During assessment, there are a number of factors that are out of your control, but that affect the decision of each application. They include, 1, the total number of applications submitted at the deadline, and the content and strength of those applications. 2, the group of assessors reviewing the application. Each group will bring different experiences and perspectives. Again, these change at every deadline. And 3, the program budget. This can fluctuate from one deadline to the next. And having said this, the program budget doesn't change too significantly. And over the last number of years, we have been able to fund a similar number of projects at each deadline, approximately 50 to 65. It's important to keep in mind that not being awarded a grant at this deadline does not mean you won't be awarded at the next one. Likewise, getting a grant at one deadline is not a guarantee that you will receive one at the next time you submit an application. What you can do is try to increase your chances and put your best foot forward by submitting a detailed application for a well thought out project. We took the time to share the program statistics and general information, such as the factors that affect your chances of receiving a grant. We hope that this information helps put the results of the assessment of your application into context. Mostly, we hope it hopes to highlight the competitiveness of this program and to reassure you that if you did not get a grant, that this doesn't mean that the assessors didn't appreciate your music. Juries usually end up with a list of projects that they want to fund, but the budget is such that they are only able to fund those at the very top of the list, those that scored the highest. We'll tell you more about how your application was assessed in the next section of this presentation. But first, it's time for our first Zoom survey. Remember that this is a pilot project and we are learning how best to prepare these info sessions so that they are of most benefit to you. Thinking about the information we just presented in the program overview section of the webinar, please let us know how you found it.
Great. Thanks for that. So the Music Recording Projects program is assessed on artistic merit, impact, and viability. Assessments are based on your answers to the questions in the application, your artistic examples, your support documents, and your project budget. Assessors are given an evaluation rubric to guide them in rating the applications. This rubric is publicly available on the OAC website, and Hind will show you how to find it.
You can consult the evaluation rubric to see how your application was evaluated by the jury. First, you go to the Music Recording Projects webpage. We are putting the link to the Music Recording Projects program page in the chat for your reference. Go to the program page and scroll down all the way to the bottom of the page. And under the To Apply section, you'll see a link to the evaluation rubric. Click on it and it will take you to this page. We are putting the link in the chat as well, so you can follow along as we discuss the rubric. This rubric applies to most OAC project programs and not just to the music recording program.
Thank you, Hind. We are now going to share some comments that were made by the assessors evaluating the application submitted at this deadline. First, we want to talk about some general comments that the assessors mentioned again and again. Overall, this group of assessors found that the strongest applications were those that were detailed and precise. They were written in a way that was direct, straightforward, and clear. This group of jurors tended to give lower scores to applications that were vague or ambiguous, or used too many words that created confusion. Please note, it's okay to have an answer that is shorter than the maximum word count, as it's better to aim for clarity rather than fill up the space with too much flowery language. Some applications made jurors question whether the artist's manager or a grant writer had written the application because they couldn't get a sense of the artist's passion for the project. By the way, there's nothing wrong with having your manager or a grant writer help you, but it is important to focus on the artist and their music and less on the technical team and the manager. Remember, you're speaking to other artists, so speak to their passion. Several applications used a tone that was a bit too personal. It's best to keep your language on a professional level. Check for typos and errors. We told the jury that this is a music program, not a grammar contest, but they said, that too many mistakes sometimes makes it hard for them to understand your application. So as a tip, many artists prepare their answers to application questions in a Word document first and use the spell check function before they copy and paste that text into Nova. Another important comment from the jury was that sometimes applicants answered all the questions, but not necessarily in the right place. The answer to a question about impact, for example, would sometimes be found in the artistic merit section. Jurors do sometimes look at your application more than once, and sometimes they need to go back to a specific section to look for a piece of information. It's important to answer the application questions in their order, in the right section, so jurors don't have to spend a lot of time searching for the information. You want them to find it easily, and keep in mind that jurors are reading a large number of applications. So you gain from keeping yours as clear, organized, and concise as possible.
Yeah. Artistic merit is perhaps the most important aspect of your application. As we mentioned earlier, no genre or type of music is turned away, and we strive to find jurors with the range of expertise necessary to assess all the projects we receive. The jurors told us there were many applications that lacked enough information for them to adequately evaluate artistic merit. In the "What are you planning to do?" question on the Artistic Merit tab of the application, don't spend too much time on generalities. Talk about your music itself. The assessors need to understand what your full album will sound like. You could talk about style, mood, instrumentation, the themes or topics. the other artists or the producer involved in your project to give them a sense of your vision for your album. You can do this in this section and also where you upload your artistic examples on the support material tab of the application. The strongest applications, according to these juries, conveyed a passion for the music, but also for their recording project. They told a compelling story. It was clear why this recording made sense to their career path at this time. They had a unique and interesting vision for their music and were continuing to grow and evolve musically. Some applicants seemed to be doing more of the same thing they had always done, and the jury didn't get a sense of artistic evolution. Those projects were rated lower. If the jury can sense your passion and see that there's growth in your musical practice, this resonates with them because they're artists too. Assessors were sometimes unclear why you want them to hear these specific pieces of music. The question just below where you upload your samples asks, how do your examples relate to this project? If you're uploading a rough demo, you should explicitly state that in the description field so jurors know that's what it is. Some of the examples submitted had poor sound quality, which was unfortunate because it didn't give the jury a real sense of what you're capable of doing. If it's a demo or a rough take, but they don't know that, it can negatively impact your application. While reading the artistic merit section of your application and while listening to your support material, the jury will keep your intended activity in mind. They'll note how well your artistic examples relate to the project and whether they demonstrate the artistic skills necessary for the project. Let's say your first artistic example is from your most recent album and it demonstrates the final polished sound you're going for. Most of the collaborators on the new album will be the same. The second sample is a new song that will be re-recorded for the upcoming album. The version here is only with guitar and voice. The final version will include the full band as heard in the first example. If you've explained that clearly in the application, then it's clear to the jury and they understand why you want them to hear these specific samples of your music. Now, as Dwayne said before, the jury might very well like your music, but in a program that's this competitive, if they don't have enough information from you in any of these criteria, that can be enough to bring you out of the grouping that they'll fund. So be specific about what you're going to do and why every step of the way. I like to tell applicants to imagine you're speaking with a young child who asks you why every time you answer a question. For example, I want to record an album. Why? Like artistically, why? I want to include these musicians. Why? Why these musicians? I'm inspired by this sound. Why? You get the idea. In the artistic merit section of your application, be sure to tell us who you are as an artist and how you are well placed to take on this project. What are you going to do? Why are you the right artist for this project? Why is now the right time to make this recording? One assessor even said that what they need to figure out in the artistic merit section of your application is the answer to the question, are you legit? The artistic merit section is where you convince them that you are, in fact, legit.
The impact section of your application is where the jury evaluates your recording project's effect on your own personal development and the other artists participating in your project, and what effect your album, EP, or demo will have on your audience. We like to think of these as inward impact and outward impact. Inward impact is how this project will affect you personally. Everyone is applying to this program to do a recording, and everyone will say it's important for them to put out new music. We need to know more than that. Be sure to elaborate why this recording is important and why now. Why is it the right time for you to do this project? Outward impact, on the other hand, considers who else will benefit from the creation of this recording. Why is it important that your audience have access to this music? What is unique, interesting, or important for audiences to hear? Is it a mashup of different genres of music? Or is it the subject matter of your songs that would resonate with people? This group of assessors rated impact highly when there was a clear effect on a wide range of artists and audiences, on OAC priority groups, and on the artist community. Projects where the only impact was on the artist's own career did not rate as well. They may have had a strong inward impact, but lacked outward impact. We saw this across many applications. The question about OAC priority groups was another thing the jurors mentioned several times. They appreciated when that question was answered clearly and directly, as opposed to when the answers were vague or there was no mention of them at all. This is not to say that your project absolutely must include OAC priority groups, but it's better to answer the question honestly than to be vague about it or ignore it altogether. An important note here is that jurors were able to sense when a priority group artist was included in the project just to tick a box. It feels forced and generally doesn't reflect well on your application. Make sure when you have good reasoning for your choice of collaborators. If you truly want to include OAC priority group musicians, then we want to see that you have meaningfully engaged with them and that they have been added and they have not been added at the last minute, just to tick a box. In terms of outward impact, these assessors preferred applications where they could tell the artist knew their audience, how to reach them, and what that audience wanted from them. Sometimes the jury had questions about why an artist wanted to record to a particular format, like streaming or CDs or vinyl. There's nothing wrong with any of that, but the jury wants to know why. Let's say, as an example, that one applicant wanted to print CDs. The jury might question why the artist would choose a format that might seem a bit outdated. But if the artist explained in the application that they have an older audience that likes to see them perform at festivals where they buy this artist's CDs, then the jury might understand the reasoning behind the choice of format. This makes it clear the artist knows their audience. And if the jury is left with unanswered questions, they tend to rate lower. This group of assessors also appreciated clear thinking about who the project will impact. They liked when the artist had written about how their music could affect others, with such relatable themes as mental health, racism, for example. Some applications lacked information about the target audience and how the recording could impact them, which led the jury to wonder if the artist didn't know their audience demographic very well. These jurors told us that the questions they wanted answered in the impact section of your application are: 1, why are you doing this project now? Who will benefit from this recording? And 3, who is your audience and how do you reach them? Is it via social media? Is there an age range? Be specific. Another element these jurors examined closely under the impact of the rubric, the heading of the rubric was your choice of collaborators. This means the other artists recording with you, but also the sound engineer and anyone helping you with promotion and marketing for the launch of your project. They wanted to see that you've gathered a solid team around you. These jurors paid particular attention to the promotional and marketing plans after the recording was launched. They evaluated this by examining the team you built around you for this project. They asked questions like, why did you choose this team? Is it that they bring a unique musical influence or a certain instrument, or that you know you can rely on them to be solid session musicians? If you look at the rubric under impact, you can see that a highly rated application would give clear evidence that the project is a unique and compelling contribution to the artist's development or to the group's objectives. This is what the jury was using to guide them in their decision-making process.
Next, the juries assessed how viable your project is. They evaluate this by looking at your work plan, your budget, as well as your previous experience managing similar projects. Do not underestimate the importance of this part of your application. Provide as detailed and precise information as you can. Give yourself enough time for this part of your application because the amount of work required to get all the necessary information and present it in a clear manner is considerable. After all, 1/3 of your application is evaluated based on this section, so make it as robust as possible. Overall, this group of assessors gave higher scores to the projects that were ready or nearly ready to begin recording, because this was a program priority as indicated on the program webpage. They appreciated the applicants who included a list of songs or had a specific number of pieces of music that they planned to record, and who appeared to have a very clear idea how their studio time was going to be used. Some applications were too vague about the number of pieces they wanted to record, and some artists were still composing their music at the time of application. Some also seemed unclear on how they were going to use their time in the studio. These generally did not rate as well. The jurors preferred work plans where all the steps were clearly outlined and with realistic timelines. They commented that some work plans were too short on details or lumped too many steps of the process together, which left them with questions about the feasibility of the project. They also questioned work plans that didn't make chronological sense, like shooting a video before mixing the songs, for example. We include a question in NOVA about how you will adapt your project if you don't receive the full amount you requested. This question is there because we know that many juries like to allocate partial grants so they can fund more projects. They want to make sure that your project can still go ahead with a slightly smaller grant, so it's important to reassure them that you're resourceful and that you have a solid plan B. Applications that these jurors rated highly included other sources of funding, whether that was from other funders or from a crowdfunding campaign or donations. They also had clear notes about what they would change in order to make their project more affordable. That could be one background vocalist instead of 2, for instance, or recording 10 songs instead of 12. Applications that were rated lower tended to have a plan B that was too vague, such as saying that if they don't get the full amount, they'll think about maybe doing a crowdfunding campaign, or saying in general terms that they'll have to revise their project. These jurors wanted specifics in order to feel confident about your project. Your budget is a big part of your application. Jurors wanted to know in precise detail how much each item will cost and why. This is particularly important in relation to artist fees. This group of assessors scrutinized your budgets closely, and they wanted us to convey a few points. Number one, budget notes are essential because the budget form in the application that you see here only allows for general categories. The budget notes are your chance to give us the full detail about your expenses and break them down and tell us how you came to these amounts. I'm going to repeat that because it's very important. How you came to these amounts. This came up again and again as a reason applications had lower scores in this criteria. Jurors wanted to understand how the costs were calculated. Number two, a very important comment about your budget notes that jurors made repeatedly is that they should be presented in a clear and transparent manner. They wanted the individual amounts and the totals and an explanation on how you came to these amounts. Number three, another item these jurors examined closely in your budgets was the artist fees. If some musicians are being paid more than others on your project, you must explain why. That why question keeps coming up. An excellent rating for viability would include fees and expenses that are carefully researched and planned. The fair compensation of artists is of great importance. Remember that the jury is made up of professional artists and they like to see artists paid equitably. Here we have an example of 2 ways to present the same information in your budget notes. Here we have a band with the trumpet player earning $600 and the violinist $200, while the rest of the band is earning $1,600 each. In the budget notes written in sentences, that's all the information you get. It doesn't explain why some musicians are being paid less than others. Jurors look at this and wonder what's going on. In the table, however, you can see that the violinist and trumpet player aren't performing on every track, while the rest of the band members are. This clearly explains the fees and shows that the fee per track is equitable, even though the total fees per artist are different. Now, it's not necessary that your budget notes need to be in a chart. However, like this is just meant as an example, but this is the level of information to include about how you plan to spend the grant, and a reminder to share this information in a way that can be easily read and understood by assessors. You can use bullet points, an Excel sheet, Google Sheets, which is available free online, or even a table in a Word document. Whichever you use, just be sure that you provide enough detail. This group of jurors needed this level of detail. Sometimes they were left guessing, and when that was the case, the application was rated lower. Why was the trumpet player paid less than the drummer? The budget notes are your chance to tell them why. Assessors also needed to verify that artists are being paid fairly. They wanted to know what fee structure you're using. Is it the American Federation of Musicians fee schedule? Or are you paying a per song honorarium? Some applications that raised questions were those where the applicant was paying themselves more than other musicians on the recording. This made it seem unfair to the other musicians, especially if there was no explanation regarding why that was the case. As you can see in the rubric, an application with no indication of research or planning around the expenses and where artist payments are insufficient would be rated poorly by the assessors.
We hope that these comments from the assessors help to illustrate that clarity is key. Don't leave any questions unanswered. Don't leave them guessing. Imagine every why question they could possibly ask you and do your best to answer them in your application. Okay, time for another Zoom survey. How useful was this section on assessor comments? Great. The next deadline for the Music Recording Projects program is November 9th, 2021 at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We encourage you to apply before the deadline, as NOVA does sometimes get a bit slow on deadline days. You don't want to be in the process of uploading your artistic examples when 1 p.m. rolls around, so give yourself enough time. In fact, you may want to upload your support material before the deadline day just to be safe. HIND is your first point of contact for any questions regarding your next application. Call well ahead of the deadline to give us enough time to adequately assist you. The application to the November deadline is now open in NOVA.
10-minute feedback calls are available to you if we haven't answered all your questions today. And these calls will focus on comments specific to your application. Sometimes we have specific comments, sometimes we don't. But if you feel you've heard enough here today to put forward a stronger application next time that you apply, you may not need a feedback call, but have a look at what you've submitted. And if there's any information that you're still missing, or if you haven't fallen into the pitfalls that we've discussed today, then it's possible you may benefit from a feedback call. The link to book a call is in your notification letter that you received in NOVA under the signature at the bottom of the letter. Now, for those of you who may have already booked a call, if we have answered all your questions today, please consider canceling your call so we can allow others to use your time slot. And you can do this by clicking on the cancel button in your confirmation email.
We will now get to your questions. Some of you sent us questions ahead of time when you registered for this webinar, so we'll start with those.
So the first question is, Are they ever successful recording grant applications when the work to be recorded is in an applicant's home studio?
Oh, interesting question. Short answer, yes. What matters to assessors is the ability to create a high quality recording. If your support material was recorded at home and sounds great, then it absolutely can get funded. Assessors get more nervous when the production quality will not be strong enough to do justice to the music. If you are doing the production work, be sure that your bio or CV demonstrates that you have the experience to back it up. And be sure to provide a sample of your production work if you can. Sometimes assessors tell us they feel the final production would benefit from an outside ear. We're definitely seeing more home studio recordings in applications and funded projects during the pandemic.
Another question, why are my applications to this program continually unsuccessful when they are successful with other art councils?
This can happen. As you have seen, this program is super competitive. OAC is limited by its budget. OAC receives its budget from the Government of Ontario. And how applications are assessed may not be the same with other funders. Be sure you understand what might be different, what is required by different funding bodies, what are their funding priorities. They will also have different assessors around the table. OAC assessors are artists. We use a peer assessment process. Your applications are not assessed by industry people or administrators. And remember that assessment is focused on the artwork. We don't place commercial viability at the forefront.
I'm wondering about budget expectations for technical personnel, such as a sound engineer.
Yeah, these standards will differ by region. Often assessors bring that perspective to the table. They have experience doing recordings and will know what seems reasonable. OAC does not give specific direction in this area. Quotes differ, some give flat fees while others break them down. It can get complicated. So do your research, ask around and get a number of quotes.
Is it okay to have project partners from outside of Ontario, such as other artists, producer, or label?
Well, with this program, its priorities are to support music created by Ontario composers or songwriters, as well as works by other Canadians. That said, if your project features non-Ontario composers or collaborators, a compelling case should be made for how the project will add to what is currently available to the public. For example, any currently unrecorded or rare music, or maybe a foremost performer of a specific genre or a composer is being included in the project. It's important to also note here that this program does not fund expenses for activities that take place outside of Ontario.
We also had questions about if someone can apply if they have already started their project and what parts could be eligible. We got this question a lot.
Yeah, great question. Great question. The activities for which you're requesting funding for cannot start before the program deadline and also cannot finish before you receive your grant results and must be completed no more than 2 years after you receive the grant results. I hope that helps. Hind, do we have any other questions?
Just one moment, I'm just going to check.
We had one question, Dwayne, sorry, about the importance of promotion and marketing, how important it is to have a solid plan for that.
That's very important. Again, your peers are around the table and oftentimes a great musical project can sound great, but if it doesn't have a strong plan to get it out to the public, to get the attention that it needs, it may not be viable and may not give you what you want out of that project. And the assessors will probably score it a bit lower if that marketing plan is not robust and clear and concise. Do we have any other questions?
Here's one that might apply to several people. So since resourcefulness is an important part of the process, do you have any advice for applicants who may have little or no prior experience raising money for a project?
Yeah, I would say, talk to your peers, and find out what they've done. Call the program officer, see if we have ideas, or speak to him, the program administrator. Yeah, and I would say, in terms of having little to no experience within this climate, it's even become more challenging. And I've seen a lot of artists, do events online versus an in-person event to release their project and maybe generate funds that way. But I would say start with asking your peers, and definitely give us a call to see if we can provide more advice to you at that time. And do we have any other questions?
There is a question about where in the application marketing should be discussed.
And that would be in the viability section. I believe it's the last question in that viability section, which asks directly what are your marketing plans, or how do you plan to promote this? I'm paraphrasing the question. I don't have the specific words, but there is a question specific to that. And again, use the word count, but be concise. If you're going to start with releasing of a single first, 3 months before the project gets released, or 6 months before the project gets released, say that. Are you hiring a PR agent, public relations manager? That does go a long way. It shows that you're tapping into a professional network, and they will help to showcase and market your project. So I would say, yeah, that question is there in the viability section.
There is another question of someone who's asking if they would be able to resubmit for the next deadline if they were unsuccessful this time.
Yes, if your project is still planning to be recorded, absolutely you can. Please pay attention to your key dates and your work plan, as those would likely have to be shifted. But you can resubmit your application for an unsuccessful project.
Which brings another question of another applicant asking if they can apply for phase 2 for the recording project, example, mixing, mastering, etc.
Well, yes, I mean, absolutely you can. So as we mentioned a bit earlier in this presentation, you want to ensure that whatever phase your project is in, that the activity which you're seeking funding for does not start before the project deadline and is not completed before the project results, the grant results are set to the public, excuse me. These are some great questions. Any more?
Yes. How many open applications or submitted applications can you have going on at one time for different programs?
Well, at the OAC, we have a 3 grant rule, okay? And you can, you just can't submit you can't submit more than 1 application to the same deadline, and you cannot submit the same project in the same phase across different sectors or programs at the OAC. This information can also be found on our website.
What is considered a strong plan for marketing?
Well, a strong plan is being detailed and concise about your specific project. Each project is different, but what you want to think about is, how is it going to get to market? How is it going to get to your audience? Are you just satisfied with how the record sounds, how the music sounds, and you're excited as any artist would be to have it completed? The next phase is about how is that project going to get out? And that's very important to this assessment process. The jury would love to see a detailed plan that speaks to, what happens after, the record is complete. When is it going to be released? How is it going to be released? Will it be for sale? Will it be for sale on a website? Will it be for sale in person? Is there a tour that is going along with it? Is there video marketing support to support singles in lead up to the album release? These are some examples of what you should think about when thinking about a marketing plan. All right, how are we looking? Do we have any more?
I've got one. Someone heard from a Canada Council for the Arts counselor that marketing budgets should not surpass 5 to 10% of the budget. Is that also true for OAC applications?
We don't attribute a specific percentage to that section of your budget, but we do prioritize artistic fees. Okay, so I would say you want to prioritize paying the artist equitably, including yourself as an artist. But marketing and budget, you want to, again, keep in mind of the program maximum budget for each category, and 10% is probably a good number to keep in the back of your mind. If marketing is outweighing the artistic fees or the mastering and recording process, it may seem to the assessors and the jury that it's a bit on the high side. So again, do your research, get your quotes, and make the best decision that you feel is right for your project. And we're just checking the chat to see if there are any more questions.
We have another question. It says, how do we find out our score?
Okay, so the OAC policy is actually not to share scores. And the reason for that is they really change with every deadline. Perspectives change as assessors change. And it's something that is used internally to help the assessment of your application, as we discussed earlier. We will share feedback if feedback was given or provided from the assessors in that one-on-one session that we have with you, if you book a meeting with us.
Here's an interesting question. What are your thoughts on pressing physical product like CDs and LPs in relation to budget revenue? Is streaming the only viable option?
Oh, good question. No, streaming is not the only viable option. CDs are viable. Again, if you know your audience and your audience, prefer CDs, then that's what you should do. And then explain that in your application. Whichever format you choose, you want to provide a rationale. And as Barbara mentioned, that why question. You want to ensure that you're answering that why. Vinyl is a product that has come back in popularity somewhat in the music industry. So if that's a format you will be choosing, again, just provide context as to why you're choosing that vinyl or that format.
I have another question. It says, I recorded the demo of a song that I want to include in my application as an example. Is it considered that I have already started the project?
Good question. I mean, no. Well, yes and no. You would be technically, I guess, starting the project if that song, the demo you're providing, is to be included on your final project. But in terms of eligible funding expenses, you would supply us the data as to when you start, your project. Your work plan will help us determine that, or help the jury determine that. And again, only activities that begin after the deadline that you're seeking funding for can be eligible.
Another one, does the project have to be an album or collection of songs to be released together? Or could you record 6 songs and release them as individual tracks every 2 months?
Good question. So there are categories within this project's program, demo and EP recordings. Demos can be released to the public or not intended for release. EP recordings would be intended for release to the public. And just for definition clarity, an EP recording is a series of songs that may be released individually or as a short album, 25 minutes maximum, and again, is intended for public release. A full-length album, as defined by the OAC, is a single work or collection of compositions, 26 minutes minimum, recorded for public release in a physical format or an online platform. And the album is only considered complete after it has been released to the public. So if you did want to release singles, we have certainly seen that with some funded projects, but for the album, full-length album, it would still need to be released as a complete compilation of, or a collection of your compositions.
And another one, how is the jury picked?
Oh, that's a great question. So the jury, so I have a hand in selecting who the jury is. And there are a few factors that are considered. One, that its representation reflects the diversity of the applications received at a specific deadline. Two, that it actually speaks to OAC's priority groups. For example, we're not going to select everyone, all the assessors from Toronto. It'll be a cross section. We're looking rural, in the far north or in the east, and all parts in between. And then it goes through a rigorous approval process here at the OAC. Yeah, that's how it is selected. And again, we are looking for a cross section of different professionals across music with different expertises that complement each other, and they're able to bring that relevant perspective to the table. These are some great questions.
Well, it is 6:30.
Okay.
Great.
Great. Again, thank you so much for your questions. We hope we've answered the majority of your questions. Before you go, we'd like to hear from you on how helpful the question and answer section was in this part of the presentation, which means it's time for our final Zoom survey. Please take a moment to tell us how useful you found the information discussed during this section.
Want to mention at this time, we didn't get to everyone's questions, and please, you can reach out to Hind after the webinar to help you, or book a feedback call and we'll answer your questions.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this very first OAC feedback webinar. Thank you for your participation and your input along the way. We sincerely hope it was helpful in clarifying the evaluation process and will prove to be useful when you prepare your next application. Have a great weekend and enjoy your long weekend.